I just wanted to get back to you. I wanted to let you know, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to let you use the card this weekend. I'm not going to explain. I'm not going to be able to let you use it this weekend. I'm sorry. I'm mean and unreasonable. Well, nevertheless, I'm not going to be able to let you use the car this weekend, okay? I'm going to let you go. All right. What can we do when we feel like we're being mean or unreasonable when we set boundaries? Setting boundaries is an essential part of being healed. Every single person in the universe will need to set boundaries in order to keep themselves individuated and healthy. We're not at our best when we're not setting boundaries. Contrary to how it can feel, which is for many of us wrong, setting boundaries is actually what keeps us healthy, what helps us to stay individuated from our abusers or other people in general, and what helps us to find ourselves. The feeling of losing yourself really comes from your failure to assert yourself and to set boundaries for yourself. So what can we do to deal with this feeling of guilt, this feeling like we're being mean or we're being unreasonable when we don't set boundaries? Well, let's examine the belief system behind this. You may believe that feeling guilty means that you've done something wrong. Let's correct that. Guilt is not an indication that you've done something wrong. Guilt is an indication that you violated your internal value system. Guilt is an indication that you violated your own internal standards. So you have your own standards or morals inside your subconscious mind. Whenever your subconscious perceives that you've done something that's violated those standards, then it's going to give you the feelings of guilt. So when I told my brother he can't use my car this weekend, which is fictional, by the way, it made me feel guilty because for me, I have a standard of being someone that he can rely on. And in this case, I had to violate my own standard. Did I do something wrong? No. Guilt is not an indication you've done something wrong. It's just an indication that you violated one of your own standards. There are times and circumstances in which we will need to violate one of our own standards. We will need to go against something we believe is right. For instance, if a man is attacking me, even though I'm not normally a violent person, I may need to strike out in my own self-defense, or if he were attacking my loved ones, I may need to strike out to defend my children, my wife. Now, let's say I struck out against him and I broke his nose. Would I feel guilty? Would you feel guilty if someone was attacking you or your wife and you struck out in defense and ended up breaking their nose? Well, it certainly is violent, and it doesn't represent who you normally are. For me, I might feel a bit guilty, but ultimately, I would feel justified in my action. And I would recognize that the circumstance dictated that I acted in a way that's different from how I would normally act. Does that make sense? The circumstance dictates that you need to act different at certain times from how you would normally behave. Because he was attacking me, it's really him who put himself in a situation where I had to act outside of my character to defend myself. And therefore, he got a broken nose. So although I could feel some guilt because normally I wouldn't break people's nose, ultimately, I don't allow that guilt to control me. Like, oh, I don't want to feel guilty, so I'm not going to strike out. No. The circumstance dictates that I react or respond differently than how I would normally act. Likewise, when you're setting boundaries, when you're setting standards, those in smaller ways are circumstances where you have to act differently sometimes than how you would normally respond. So yes, you may come off as mean. And in that moment, you are being unreasonable or unflexible or inflexible because in that moment, you are not flexing. You are not yielding. You are laying down your rule, your standard. which is necessary for boundaries, because what good are they if we don't enforce them, if we don't stand on them? Does that make sense? So recognize that there are circumstances where you do need to go against what you would normally want to be or want to be perceived as. If we prioritize being likable, being reasonable, and being nice, too much of that can cause you to be a flat character, and you're going to get mowed over like you're flat, because you cannot exist, you cannot survive properly and maintain your health if you're not able to stand up for what you believe in, if you're not able to defend yourself, if you're not able to set boundaries around your resources. You have to set boundaries. And setting boundaries means that at a moment, in a certain circumstance, you're not going to be nice. You're not going to seem reasonable. And you may not be likable. But just because you have to change for a moment doesn't mean that's who you are. You might have a car that's reliable that you use for 5 years and it always starts. It always starts for you. But there was one time when you drove it through a rainstorm and the water was so high that for about an hour after driving it through that high water, the car did not start. After the car dried off, then the car started again. Now, would you stop calling that car reliable? Since that storm, the car has continued to start. Before the storm, the car always started. So now, because there was 1 hour where the car didn't start, would you say this car is not reliable? Of course not. It's still a reliable car, even though there was a circumstance where it behaved outside of its normal character. Does that make sense? So just because there may be a time where you have to seem mean by someone's perception or unreasonable by their perspective, it doesn't mean that you are a mean, unreasonable person. You just had to change according to the circumstance. So don't hold back in setting boundaries, asserting your boundaries, and enforcing your boundaries, even if that means you have to be perceived differently than how you normally are.